Okay, welcome back everyone. Today what we're going to look at is graphing lines in slope-intercept form, part 2. Today what we're going to look at is we're going to graph our equations using a table. This is an extremely useful tool that you can graph any equation. You can graph quadratic equations, exponential equations, linear equations, whatever type of equation you're working with. If you use a table and just make a table, you can graph anything without a calculator. So that's going to be a really, really useful tool, especially as you go up the ladder in your math classes. Once you get to trig, pre-calc, all of those classes, if you can use a table, you can sketch anything. Okay, so first thing we're going to look at is number 1. So it's y equals 2x. So we are going to use a table. Yes, we could graph this technically using our slope and y-intercept, but we're going to do it just another way. Okay, so you'll notice I gave a table here, and I already gave you guys your x values. You could easily make a table without being given those, just like I'm doing over to the left, and you can just put in whatever x values you want. The reason I'm using those 3 is because it gives me a good representation of what's happening on the y-axis, what's happening on the left side of the x-axis, and what's happening on the right side of the x-axis. But you can use any 3 x coordinates that you want. Okay, so if I know that x is negative 2, how could I generate y? I want you to think about that for a second. If I know x is negative 2, what is y? So I'm sure a lot of people got that. If x is negative 2, I could use the equation here to easily find y. Well, if y equals 2x, 2 times x, if we know x is negative 2, y must equal negative 4 when x is negative 2. And I can use that to generate all my points. So now if x is 0, if I plug that in here, 2 times 0 equals 0. And then if I plug in 2 for x, 2 times 2 is 4. And now I'm going to plot my points. So if I go left 2, down 4, 0, 0, and 2, 4. And then I'm going to connect those just like always. Oops. And draw my arrows on both sides. Okay, so definitely a linear equation, just like we expected because it's in slope-intercept form. Our slope is 2, and our y-intercept is, you don't see it there, therefore it is 0. Okay, so now we're going to look at another line here, y equals 2. Well, that definitely looks a lot different than what we worked with in the last video. So again, I'm going to use a table to figure this out. Well, I know that y always equals 2. That's what this equation says. It doesn't matter what your x value is. There's no x in the equation. No matter what the x is, y is always 2. So I can come up with whatever x values I want. I know y is always going to be 2. So I'm going to plot my points. Negative 2, 2, 0, 2, and 2, 2. And then I connect them. And now I see that I have a horizontal line here. My slope is, if you know your slope, you can definitely pause this video and write it down. See if you can write down the slope and y-intercept. Okay, so now to talk about the slope. Slope means kind of how much are you rising and running, how much are you increasing on a, kind of like a ramp. So if this was a ramp in number 1, I'm rising up 2 over 1, up 2 over 1. So my slope is 2. Here, I'm not going up at all. I'm just going straight. Think about if you're walking along the floor. You're not inclining at all. So your slope is nothing. It's just 0. You're just walking in a straight line. What's the y-intercept? The y-intercept here is 2. It's crossing the y-axis at 2, which makes sense because y is always 2. what kind of line is y equals 2? It looks horizontal. And now taking a look at the next one here, we have x equals 2. So now I've given you guys your y coordinates. Again, you can pick whichever ones you want, but this is the same concept as the last one. Just like when y was always 2, if the equation is x equals 2, that means x is always 2 no matter what y is. So now if I plot my points, 2, -2, 2, 0, and 2, 2. And I connect the points. There's my line. So now if I compare this one to number 2, see if you can write down what kind of line it is, and also see if you remember what this slope is called, if it's just a vertical line. Okay, so the slope for this one, we're rising, but we're not running at all. So I like to think about this as, would it be possible for you to just start climbing in the air without a ladder or anything? Would it just be possible if I was just walking up in the air? That's not possible. So what we're going to call that is the word undefined. This slope is undefined. So when is a slope undefined? It's undefined when the line is vertical. So what kind of line is x equals 2? It's vertical. And then the last question is, what is the y-intercept? Well, the y-intercept is wherever the graph crosses the y-axis, which is the vertical axis, and it doesn't look like the graph is going to cross the y-axis at all. They're actually parallel to each other. So there is no y-intercept. Okay, so now let's take a look at our 3 lines here. So you can see in number 1, we just had our typical linear equation. It's going up 2 over 1, and we had a slope of 2. In number 2, our slope was 0, and we had a horizontal line. In number 3, we had an undefined slope, and that was when it was a vertical line. So you should be able to tell, when you look at a vertical line, you should be able to say, that's an undefined slope. When you look at a horizontal line, you should be able to say that has a slope of 0. So those are some very important concepts there. Okay, so now taking a look at our examples, we are going to graph each of these equations in slope-intercept form. Okay, so our slope is in A, 1/2, and we don't see a y-intercept, so it is 0. In B, well, maybe we should graph it first, or if you remember, when you have y equals, so take a look up here. This is a really important concept. Do you guys see how in number 2 it's a y equals a number, and in number 3 it's x equals a number? Whenever you have y equals just a number, you know that the slope is 0. Y equals a number. It's always just going to go right through the y-axis at that number. Now when we look at number 3, we see it's x equals a number. Whenever you have x equals a number, the graph goes directly through that x value along the x-axis. So cuts right through the x-axis, and it's a vertical line. So anytime you see x equals a number, you know that the slope is undefined. That's definitely something that you want to remember. Anytime you have y equals a number, your slope will be 0, and anytime you have x equals a number, your slope is undefined. If you remember that, it makes graphing these things really easy. Okay, so like I said, now if we do B here, y equals a number, well, I could just start plotting points where y equals -3. Y equals -3 here, it's also negative 3 here, 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 and I could keep going on forever. Or I could think about it as, I know that y equals a number is always a horizontal line that goes directly through that number on the y-axis. What is our slope when it's y equals a number? Our slope is 0 because it's a horizontal line. And our y-intercept, it cuts through negative 3, our y value. And while I'm working on this one, I'm just going to plot A really quick. Our y-intercept is 0, 0, and our slope is 1/2. So up 1 over 2, up 1 over 2. And when you run out of room, you can always work on the other side and do the opposite. Instead of going up and right, you go down and left. Down 1, left 2. And connect your points, and don't forget about those arrows. Okay, so now moving on to our next one, we see it's x equals a number. Right away when you see x equals a number, you should start thinking vertical line, undefined slope. So I have x equals 5 here, x equals 5 there, also here, and it keeps going on forever. You don't necessarily need to put those points. You just need a vertical line cutting through x equals 5 on the x-axis. So what is our slope of x equals a number? We know it's undefined. Remember, another way you can remember that is I can't just start climbing in the air. A slope of 0 is horizontal. You can walk across the ground. You're not going up or down at all, but you can't just start walking into the air. The y-intercept, it does not cross the y-axis at all, so therefore the y-intercept does not exist. There is no y-intercept. And then our last one here, we have y equals negative x. So remember, the number in front of x is always the slope. So we see it's negative, and there's no number, so therefore it's an invisible 1. So it's negative 1. We don't see a y-intercept, so it must be 0. So we start at 0, 0, go down 1, right 1. So it's always to the right. So it's either down and to the right, that's a negative slope. Up and to the right is a positive slope. And then just connect your points. Okay, so quick recap here. If you're not sure how to graph something, you can always use a table. Come up with whatever x values you want, plug them in, and you can get y. If you have y equals a number, just y equals a number, you know that you have a horizontal line which has 0 slope. If you have x equals a number, you know that you have a vertical line which has an undefined slope. If you can remember those 3 things, you will definitely do well with graphing. As always, if you guys have any questions,